November 16, 1907, Oklahoma joined the Union as its 46th state. Getting there was not easy. The journey involved failed efforts to create the nation's first Native American state, as well as its first all-black state. ONR's Kathy Tatum takes us to the Oklahoma History Center to travel Oklahoma's bumpy road to statehood.
The saga of how Oklahoma became a state begins in the 1830s with the removal of the 5 civilized tribes and their African slaves from traditional tribal homelands in the east to a new place in the west called Indian Territory. Tara Dameron is assistant curator of American Indian collections at the Oklahoma History Center.
Part of the deal and the trade was that they were going to have a home in the west that would belong to them.
At the time, there wasn't a push to create a Native American state. But following the Civil War, attempts were made to create both Native American and African American states in what eventually would become the state of Oklahoma. During treaty talks in 1866, Choctaw Chief Allen Wright proposed naming Indian Territory Oklahoma. In Choctaw, the phrase Oklahoma means red people. It's used to describe Native Americans as a whole. Wright envisioned Oklahoma as an Indian state, but it would be years before serious efforts would be put into creating one. However, the Treaty of 1866 did do something that eventually led to the idea of an all-black state. It required tribes to emancipate their slaves and offer them full citizenship. So in 1887, when the Dawes Act divided communally held tribal lands in Indian Territory into allotments for individual tribe members, black tribal citizens were given land too.
So you had an awful lot of black folks in Oklahoma that received land as part of the allotment process, mostly in eastern Oklahoma. Then you had the land runs that occurred, and unbeknownst to a lot of people, black folks took part in the land runs too. When I was a kid coming up, the history book said when Oklahoma was open for white settlement. Well, it wasn't open for white settlement. It was open for settlement. And you had an awful lot of black folks that took part in the land runs.
As a result of allotments and land runs, Bruce Fisher with the History Center says blacks owned 1.5 million acres in Oklahoma by 1905 and had established more than 50 all-black towns like Taft and Boley.
Black people own more land in Oklahoma than all of the land that black people own combined throughout the United States.
That gave E.P. McCabe the idea of creating an all-black state.
Why not solve that same problem, race relations in Oklahoma, by giving black folks a part of the state? And in the talk about going back to Africa, give us our own section of land. And that's how the idea of making Oklahoma a black state evolved.
However, the idea didn't gain much traction outside black communities, so
it didn't happen.
Efforts to create the nation's first Native American state failed as well. In 1890, Congress divided Indian Territory into 2 entities, Oklahoma Territory in the west, Indian Territory in the east. The idea was they would eventually merge and become a state. But people living here had other ideas. They wanted 2 states.
So on the eastern half of Oklahoma, what would have been the state of Sequoia, and then the western half would have been the state of Oklahoma.
The state of Sequoia, named for the Cherokee statesman who invented that tribe's written language, would be a place where traditional tribal ways would blend with a constitutional government. Larry Odell, director of special projects at the History Center, says national politics nixed the 2-state idea, not because one state would be for Native Americans, but because residents of both states would heavily favor the Democratic Party.
Nationally, the Republicans were in charge of the White House and of Congress, so there was a real obstacle to make the Indian Territory a state.
It would have upset the Democrat-Republican balance, and really pressure from the other western states just sort of precipitated the final decision, which was basically that Oklahoma would just be one state and you would not have the state of Sequoia.
However, Dameron says the state of Sequoia does live on in a way. Its constitution served as a template for what became Oklahoma's first state constitution. A document Dr. Bob Blackburn, executive director of the Oklahoma Historical Society, says clearly outlines the concerns and desires of the men and political forces that pushed for a single state of Oklahoma.
This Constitution is drafted that fears government, fears big business, tries to keep government at the local grassroots level.
At the same time, it expresses the exuberance and hope for the future, later captured by the musical Oklahoma.
Soon be living in a brand new state, gonna teach you great.
A brand new state shaped by land-run farmers and merchants, tribal influences, and African Americans.